They say the world needs diplomatic, balanced, and predictable leaders. But what happens when someone emerges who ignores the playbook and throws the board to the ground? Donald Trump doesn't try to fit in. He redesigns the game. While some call him a threat to the world order, others see him as the only one capable of exposing the hypocrisy of international alliances. Love or hate, no one remains indifferent. And perhaps that is precisely his greatest power. Trump doesn't govern, he negotiates. He doesn't build bridges, he tests their resilience. Every word, every provocation, every handshake is a calculated move. And, as chaotic as it may seem, there's a method behind the madness. While the world fears diplomatic collapse, Trump is shaping a new global logic, more direct, less disguised. What if, in the end, what we call a crisis is merely the birth of a new system of power? Get ready. What you'll understand here goes far beyond headlines and speeches. We'll decipher the real game behind the alliances, confrontations, and strategies that are reshaping the planet. Because understanding Trump is understanding the world's new code, a code few perceive, but which is already deciding the future of all nations. When Donald Trump returned to the global political scene, the geopolitical landscape seemed to turn upside down. Leaders who previously relied on the formalities of diplomacy found themselves forced to adapt to the direct, unpredictable, and, in some ways, brutal game he imposes. Trump doesn't speak to please. He speaks to test loyalties. He's the kind of player who moves pieces without asking permission. And for some countries this is a threat. For others, an opportunity. The fact is, the world suddenly revolved around Washington again. Many analysts say Trump isn't just taking center stage, he's rewriting the rules. His America First vision isn't just a slogan, it's a manifesto of power and self-sufficiency. He understands foreign policy as a business, and he negotiates like someone making contracts, not treaties. When Trump shakes hands with a leader, he's measuring strength, not kindness. It was the same with Xi Jinping, with Putin, with Macron. And his every gesture echoes across markets, armies, and alliances. But perhaps what most disturbs and fascinates the world is his almost blind confidence in himself. Trump acts as if he's always right, and this conviction makes even his adversaries rethink their own strategies. That's why, like it or not, he sets the pace. The question that's beginning to grow behind the scenes of the powers that be is, how far is he willing to go to maintain this position? The answer begins to take shape when we observe how he handles direct confrontation. Trump's diplomacy has never been about formal hugs and handshakes. It's about endurance testing. He understands that the world respects those who impose limits and fears those who demonstrate power, not those who seek consensus. Therefore, instead of seeking harmony, he provokes tension. And it is precisely in this tension that he measures the degree of dependence on others. Trump negotiates like a poker player. He bluffs when necessary, bets big when he senses weakness, and above all, makes the other believe he never backs down. When it comes to alliances, his strategy is clear. If it doesn't serve the interests of the United States, it's out of the game. This stance creates discomfort among traditional allies, such as Europe, but arouses admiration among authoritarian leaders who see him as a figure of strength. Interestingly, this style yields results. By pressuring NATO countries to increase defense spending, he achieved something decades of subtle diplomacy had not. Trump understands power not as a kindness, but as a currency that multiplies when firmly imposed. But there's a hidden cost to all this. Every open confrontation leaves its mark, rearranges the playing field, and pushes powers to seek new alliances. When Trump extends his hand, it's hard to know whether he's offering help or assessing the terrain for his next move. And this method, as controversial as it is effective, becomes even more complex when two giants who don't play to lose enter the scene: China and Russia, the true mirrors of the power politics that he admires and challenges at the same time. The world is experiencing a dangerous déjà vu. Just as in the last century, the planet is once again dividing into blocks. Only now, the fight isn't just for territory, but for data, technology, and digital influence. Trump realized early on that modern warfare isn't won with tanks, but with information. By challenging China, he attacked not just one country, but a production system that dominates almost everything the world consumes. His battle is symbolic. It's the struggle between communist manufacturing and patriotic American capitalism. On one side, Xi Jinping plays the game of patience. Silent, strategic, and expansionist, he understands that each trade contract is a seed planted in the soil of global power. On the other, Trump acts like someone entering a minefield in a suit and tie, ready to drop bombs if necessary. The imposed tariffs, the technological restrictions, and the espionage accusations were just the beginning of a clash that transcends borders. Meanwhile, Putin watches and smiles, because every friction between Washington and Beijing is an opening for Moscow to advance. The curious thing is that, despite the explosive rhetoric, there's a hidden respect between these three leaders. They all play similar cards: national pride, personal power, and an almost mystical vision of their own destiny. Trump knows he can't control the world alone, but he also knows he can destabilize anyone who tries. And it's precisely in this game of threats and nods, of smiles and sanctions, that the new Cold War is born. A silent but lethal dispute, where every move is calculated and every alliance can change the course of history. No American president has shaken the symbolic structures of the Middle East as much as Donald Trump. By recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, he not only broke with decades of diplomatic neutrality, he lit a religious fuse that spans centuries. For some, it was an act of courage. For others, a calculated provocation. The fact is, this decision redefined the balance between faith, politics, and power. Trump understood that in the Middle East, one governs not only with weapons, but with beliefs. The Abraham Accords were perhaps his boldest move. While the world expected conflict, he forged rapprochements between Israel and historically rival Arab countries, such as the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. This wasn't just diplomacy. It was geopolitical marketing. Trump transformed the most unstable religious arena on the planet into a spectacle of unlikely alliances, with flags, smiles, and promises of peace. But behind the flashes, each leader involved harbored intentions that went far beyond harmony: oil, security, and power. And this is where the true game of faith comes in, not the one preached in churches, but the one played at the negotiating table. Faith, for Trump, is also a tool of influence. By presenting himself as a defender of Israel and Christian values, he won millions of supporters inside and outside the United States. What many don't realize is that, behind this spiritual rhetoric, there was a political calculation that transcended borders. And this blend of faith and strategy, which works so well in the Middle East, is beginning to resonate powerfully in another territory, where American power has always sought dominance: Latin America. Latin America was once again the scene of silent disputes, and Trump realized this before most. When he looked at the map, he saw more than borders. He saw foreign influence infiltrating ports, mining companies, and even communication systems. The Chinese presence in the region grew like an underground root, discreet but deep. And what began with loans and infrastructure projects became a project of economic dependence. Trump reacted as if protecting a territory. He hardened his tone, restored ties, and pressured allies to choose their true side. Venezuela was the breaking point. For Trump, the Maduro regime was more than a dictatorship. It was a symbol of Russian and Chinese penetration into America's backyard. Sanctions became a weapon, and diplomacy became a platform. While some accused him of imperialism, Others saw him as the only leader willing to confront the silent expansion of external powers on the continent. And the curious thing is that the more he pressured, the more countries in the region were forced to reveal their true intentions. Brazil, for example, became a strategic link in this game, a partner, but also a piece to be watched carefully. Ultimately, what Trump did was remind Latin America that neutrality is a luxury few can afford. He knew that if the United States lost ground there, it would lose control of one of the most resource-rich regions on the planet. And it is precisely this repositioning between proximity and coercion, cooperation and distrust, that reignites the debate over the future of global alliances. Because if even America's backyard is up for grabs, imagine what will happen to the major international institutions that for decades were the foundation of the Western world. Major international institutions, the UN, NATO, WHO, and the IMF, are currently experiencing an identity crisis. For decades, they represented stability and cooperation. Now, they seem like pieces on a board that no longer follows the same rules. Trump realized this before many. For him, these organizations no longer serve the interests of the United States and have become burdens disguised as partnerships. When he cut funding, threatened to withdraw from agreements, and questioned decisions, the world called it rebellion. But for Trump, it was simply business logic. If it doesn't bring profit or power, it's out of the game. This behavior exposed something few wanted to admit. Global alliances were sustained by convenience, not conviction. When Trump began dismantling agreements, many leaders panicked, fearing a collapse of the multilateral system. But, paradoxically, it was this rupture that forced several nations to reinvent themselves. NATO increased investment, the UN sought greater transparency, and even the IMF began to review its power structure. In other words, by challenging the system, Trump ended up forcing it to evolve. However, the price of this transformation is high. Trust between nations has become fragile, and the rules that once guaranteed balance are now questioned at every summit. The world is learning to deal with unpredictability, and Trump once again seems to have mastered this art. He doesn't follow the rhythm of traditional diplomacy, he dictates his own. And it is precisely in this calculated chaos, in this new model of decentralized power, that the great question that drives this entire story arises. Is Trump destroying the global order, or simply building a new one? The world may change silently, but power never moves by chance. Trump isn't just a figure in modern politics, he's a game changer, a mirror of a system that needs to reinvent itself to survive. Like it or not, his presence has rewritten the language of diplomacy and shown that the 21st century belongs to those who dare to challenge consensus. The question remains, who is ready to play this new game? Alliances are being redrawn before our eyes, and every decision, whether made by a country, a company, or an ordinary person, is part of this transformation. What you do, what you consume, what you share. Everything is connected to the new order that is emerging. Power no longer resides solely in palaces. It resides in the ideas that shape the masses. And understanding this is the first step to avoiding being manipulated by them. Now it's your turn. Watch, reflect, and draw your own conclusions. Is Trump the architect of a new global equilibrium, or the catalyst for the chaos that precedes a new era? Consider this. And if you want to continue following in-depth analyses of politics, geopolitics, and power, subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and leave a like. Because the next chapter of this story has already begun.